Hello, Witness Wednesday. This is a demo of the lister panel, which is the thing whose code I've been covering for the past few weeks. It's a pretty small amount of code. It's less than 2,000 lines of code, including the data for the default settings that it comes with. And I think it's pretty cool the way it's architected just to get a lot out of a little. So what I want to do is show you how it actually works so you can kind of see when I talk about the various parts of it in the articles, you can know what I'm actually talking about. This is the lister panel up here. It's basically a row of buttons that you get which pick what list you're using. And in this case I have flat selected mode, but I can go to say layer listers or whatever. This is in Caseytown, not in the actual Witness Island, because I talked to John about it and we decided that generally there'd probably be too many spoilers if I tried to demo the lister panel on the island, because I'd select stuff and you would then see secret locations of things or types you weren't supposed to know were there or whatever. I mean, it's a puzzle game, so at some level we can't really give anything away. So we're just going to demo it in Caseytown, and I'm going to narrowly choose the things I demo to make sure that there are no spoilers. So anyway, flat selected mode is just a mode where basically anything that I select in the editor gets listed in the listed panel. So you can see now that I've selected three things. Those three things are selected here, and you can click on them to deselect them or to select a particular one. But really basically that's just a very simple mode, and you can kind of see the HI on the side here is an editor option for hiding. So as I click on those, it'll hide an option, or I can click here and it'll hide all of them or whatnot. And that flat selected is just one of the main lister modes that there are. Okay, so there are a lot of cool things you can do with the lister panel, and basically the way that you do cool things with it, besides using the presets that are there, the power really is in making your own presets, so you can kind of use it to do anything that you want it to do that you can do with entities in terms of finding them, displaying them, or changing them. So to give you an example, I'm just going here and build one from the ground up. Basically, there's not that many actual UI elements in the lister UI system. In the witness UI system, which means that the interface is a little janky and it's a little bit hard to use. But that's just the way it goes sometimes. Not a lot of time is spent on the UI system in the witness. It's a quick thing that John did a long time ago, probably even actually think before Braid. It's just been used since then. So it gets work done and it's very easy to program, which is a great aspect of it. But nobody has actually sat down and implemented things like combo boxes or stuff like that. So when you have something that's like, I want to edit a list of different displays, you end up with a panel like this because there's not a whole lot of ways you could do it. So anyway, I'm just going to pick an unused one here. And then you use the little display drop down to basically say, hey, okay, I'm going to give this a name so I can remember it. We'll just call it test. And then the short name is the thing that will show up when this goes back to the collapse mode, when it goes to here. The short name has to be a short thing that can be used. So if this was long, like test, lister test, let's say, you wouldn't want that to show up in small because it would be too large. And then the description is just something that you can remember it by. So like, this is a test for Witness Wednesday. And then if I collapse this, I won't actually see it quite yet, actually. If I collapse this, you'll notice that it's not actually here. And the reason for that is you have control over which ones are actually shown in that, and it's this shown when collapsed button that determines that. So if you turn that on, then you'll get it here, and you do as many rows it has to show them. Usually you try to keep it to one row or maybe two rows if you're a power user, I guess. But anyway, that's how you make your own lister list, and then from there you can start to pick out things that you might want. Now the top level options here, auto update I covered in the articles actually. It's just whether or not it updates every frame, and basically in the witness things are fast enough that you can pretty much always have everything updated each frame. So you only really turn that off if for some reason you're doing something special and you don't want the list to ever change. You want to just freeze it in place. So the list options that you have at the top level were also things I covered in the articles. And they're basically things like whether or not you want to display things that are inside groups as being under those groups in like a hierarchical view, or whether you want it flat if you turn that off. Pull groups pulls in groups for things that would be in the list, even if the groups themselves wouldn't be in the list. Groups first puts groups at the top of the listing. Selected first puts selected things at the top of the listing. So those are kind of like you imagine in like Windows Explorer or something. You might want to be able to see those, how directories are sorted to the top. It's that kind of a thing. So the first thing I need to do to actually get some things in my listing is to pick a type, or more, some combination of types that are the things that will show up in the listing to begin with. So inanimate is the most populous object in the witness. It's just some geometry, something that's sitting there that doesn't have any particular action in the game. So if I click on that, you'll see immediately my list down here is populated with things. And much like I was saying, I can choose to do, for example, hierarchical or not, but since I'm only showing inanimate objects, there won't actually be any hierarchy to show because things don't get parented in the witnesses really. Only groups are used for sort of a hierarchical, structure in the witness, if you will. So if I wanted to see them and I'm not including groups, what I have to do is say pull groups. And as you can see, when I do that, immediately I get a thing here. One of these inanimate objects that was listed was in fact under a group. Here is the group now, and it is now included. If I wasn't going to do that, I'd just see the flat listing, and there you go. Now if I want to still see a flat listing, but I still want to pull groups in, I can turn off hierarchical, and you can see it'll do the listing, but now it doesn't put things under other things. It just shows everything. And similarly, if I wanted to use groups first to populate those to the top, I could do that. Selected first I could do as well, where if I go in and select this guy, it pops to the top, etc., etc., etc. And so those are some pretty simple options to just control how the list is displayed. They're not particularly interesting, but they are particularly useful. So once you have decided how that goes, you can pretty much ignore that panel from now on. It's not particularly useful. But now you can kind of actually use the lister panel as it was intended. You're doing some edits, and it shows you all the inanimate objects. Now in Casey Town, which is where we are, it is not particularly onerous to list all the inanimate objects. There they all are, because there just aren't that many of them. And I can select some of them, and you can see that it changes which ones are highlighted here, as you might expect. But if you were actually on the main island, you can imagine there's hundreds of thousands of entities on that island. And so there may be tens or hundreds of thousands of inanimate entities, and you would just get a giant list that would be completely useless to you. So one of the really cool features of the lister panel, and something that I actually had never seen before, although I suspect someone somewhere must have done it, is that in addition to the standard ways that you can list entities, you can also start filtering them by how far they are away from something important in the editing system. So for example, if I want to, I can say just show me things that are 25 meters or less away from the camera, right? And now what I get is I get a list that is customized for just the things that are near me. So as I fly around, you can kind of see there, it's updating dynamically as I move to just show me the inanimate objects that happen to be nearby. Now, this is extremely useful, especially for someone like me who doesn't work on the project full-time or anything, who just comes in for a week here or there, or a month sometimes and stuff like that to help out. I don't know the taxonomy of everything in the game, and I don't have the same level of familiarity with the island as like the artists do who are working on it every day, and so it really helps to be able to do this because I can fly around with this filter on looking for things like if I had to edit doors or something, or groups, and I don't really know how they're structured, I can't necessarily navigate to them, I can just fly to sort of the area that I'm interested in with a door filter on and just see here are the doors in that area, where are they all, right? But as you might imagine, it's not all that useful to see sometimes because all I'm getting is the list. So if I was looking to work with the list, that's good. But visually, I can't tell what are the things that are passing this filter like in the world. And so another really cool feature in addition to spatial filters, and just to finish that up, you can filter by like the distance from the edit cursor or the distance from the focus of the camera, like where you're looking at. Because again, the camera is where you actually are. The focus of the camera is sometimes more useful because if you're kind of zoomed out and looking down at an area, it can be much more useful to see what's close to the focus where you're looking rather than where the camera is, but either or. So one of the other things that's really useful are these visors. And so if I turn on a visor, say for entity position, what that is that's an overlay that shows me for everything in the lister panel what its position is, marked with a green dot. So this allows me to do some nice things where like saying, okay, like I was saying with doors before, where are the doors? And I can even do this in a nice way where I can just zoom out, right? I can turn off the spatial filter, so like just show me everything. And then I can go in and say, where are all the doors going? In this case, I've got, we made this listing for inanimate objects, so there are all the inanimate objects, right? And so I can now see where all of them are in the game. And this is pretty useful in a number of ways because you can do other things with this, such as showing all of, say, where all the puzzles are in the game, for example, by highlighting types that involve puzzles, or what are all the puzzles that have been solved in this playtest. For example, you can pop into here and see what has been solved, what hasn't been solved, like what aren't players finding, those sorts of things. So this is kind of useful for a number of things in addition to editing. But just to give you a more concrete example, so in the editor we've got this thing, a concept called routing. And this will kind of allow me to introduce also this other thing, parameter filters, which is another thing, which is filtering on parameters. So one of the things that you can do in the editor is say something is rooted, which is to say that it is locked to the ground. As you move it around, it will reproject itself onto the ground. So for uneven terrain, for example, it would help a lot. And so what I want to do maybe now is see, show me all the stuff that's rooted. Oops, clicked the wrong one. Show me all the stuff that's rooted in the game. And so as you can see now, what I've got here is I've got a nice display that just shows me for the entire game itself, and in Case Town it's not many, but in the Witness Island it would show me everything. What's everything that's rooted? And there they are, right? I can see all the different places where something is rooted, which is really, really handy. And so what these are the parameter filters that I talked about in the article. And you can see that it's got the ternary thing that I was talking about, where I can say, okay, don't filter by it, filter by its positive, like things that are rooted, or filter by its negative, things that aren't rooted. And similarly, like I said in the articles, if you do have filters like this, sometimes what you want to do instead of necessarily filtering by something is you may want to also be able to edit that thing or exclusively edit that thing. So in this case, I have all the inanimate objects, and I'm not going to filter by rooted, but what I am going to do is say, give me the option to edit rooted things right from the list. So now what you get is you can see that my list has this other column here, which is the rooted flag, which I can, basically just toggle immediately. So if I have some things selected here, for example, right, I can see these are my 3 selected things. I can see whether they're rooted or not right from here, even though I'm not even filtering on it, and I can toggle it. So now this guy is rooted. He wasn't rooted before. Now he isn't. I can also bulk edit. I can say everything in here, root it, unroot it, right? And I can do kind of fancy things like this that are pretty handy. And similarly, if I wanted to do things like root everything that was selected, I can add something to my filter to say, filter by selected as well, or something like that. And then you can do that sort of thing. So for example, if I was in my flat selected guy and I wanted rooted editing in there, I could click that on, right? And now I've got, so this was the hidden editor, which was also in there, so I can hide things, right? That got turned on. And so what I can do now is if I select things, I can hide them in bulk if I want to, or unhide them in bulk. I can root them in bulk if I want to, or unroot them in bulk. So by combining things, you can sort of create your own little fast editors really quickly with no programmer ever having to be in the loop. You can just create how you want to view things and how you want to operate on things, and you just get an interface that allows you to do that really quickly. And you can stack as many things on there as you want. You can say, all right, go back to our lister test thing. I want to be able to see and edit visibility. I want to be able to see whether things are locked. I wanted to see whether or not they have, convex collision. There's an engine feature for you. And things like this. And then when you go back to your listing, you just get a matrix of all of these settings, which you can do en masse or pick at a time and all that sort of stuff. So it's really, really handy in that way. And it really allows you to build some pretty neat things with it without having to do all that much work. And again, that's a very small piece of code, and it's actually relatively easy to use, although it is a bit janky because, again, the user interface just isn't something that has had a lot of time spent on it in the Witness. So yeah, that's the way that goes. Anyway, I think that's basically all of the interesting aspects of it that I can think of at the moment. There are probably some things that I'm forgetting, but I don't think so. I think I covered just about everything. There's obviously, as I mentioned in the articles, things up here that allow you to quickly clear everything, clear all the operations, clear all the filters in there. The spatial things, like I said, you can kind of pick your distances in there. The included types have the same sort of thing. You can sort of clear everything if you want to. You can also, one thing I guess I didn't talk about is this type from thing. List just gives you this list like I was using to pick things like inanimate objects. But the other thing you can do is say okay, get it from the selection. So whatever the selection is, whatever I have selected, that's the type I want to see. So if I pick an inanimate, I want to see inanimates in here. If I pick something else, I want to see something else in here. And so that's just another way, doing it. An entity instantiation ties it into another part of the UI that I'm not going to talk about right now, but that's just a kind of community thing. And then the display panel we covered pretty much in its entirety. So that's the lister panel. I hope that's given you an idea of kind of how it works. And like I said, it's an incredibly small amount of code, but it gets a lot done. And I think that's kind of the important part, and that's what I kind of want to talk about in the articles. I wrote it in a very short period of time. It maybe was 2-3 days total, if that. It was very kind of, it was just a very quick thing to write. And it just kind of shows you how if you pick what you're going to do sort of and narrowly enough and do it in a nice efficient way, you can actually get a lot of power over not very much code and not very much time spent. And sometimes on projects that's really the best thing to do if you don't have time to go for the perfect thing. And we could all imagine a much fancier thing than this, but you don't always have time for that stuff, so you want to try and do things that can be highly leveraged and get you a lot of functionality if you need it. And it may not be the most user-friendly thing in the world, but at least now, if I need to, I can always make a thing for somebody and I can always do it. So I can, if someone needs to know, I got to figure out a way to like clear out all these things, I can be like, okay, we can do that with a lister panel. Here, you just build a query like this and off it goes. So I hope that gave you a good idea of how it works, and I will see you next Witness Wednesday.